Hey guys! So a couple of hours ago I finished my reading vlog for this past week and I did not think I would be coming back to you so quickly, but I have finished my third book. Yay! Woohoo! Okay, so let's talk about it, shall we? The book I'm going to discuss with you guys is a book called Once by Morris Gleitzman. Now, the first thing I'm going to tell you, first thing I'm going to tell you actually is the rating that I gave this book, because I gave it 2 out of 5 stars. And there are reasons why I gave it 2 out of 5 stars, but since there's a lot of noise going on around me, I'm just going to quickly pause and I'll be right back. Okay, we have some very gusty winds going on outside, even though it's the middle of summer, but I'll just let that go. Okay, this book is not a book that I chose to read because it's something that I really wanted to read, unlike Personal Demons and The Replacement. This book is actually a book that I ended up reading because I want to help a friend of mine whose child is going to high school for the first time this year, and one of the books he needs to read is this one. So let's talk about it. Let's talk about why I gave it 2 stars. Let's talk about the genre. Let's talk about what happens in this book. This is a spoiler review of this book, Once by Morris Gleitzman. So if you have not read this book and you don't want to hear or see spoilers, please do not continue on with the video. But if you don't mind hearing spoilers, let's get right into it. Okay, first things first, this book is how would I categorize it? A contemporary war story, I suppose. It's a middle grade book. So it's not even young adult. It's definitely middle grade. The writing style is absolutely middle grade. It's really easy to read. There are even a lot of parts in the book where the author has... Okay, I'll show you this page 89. So I'll show you that page there. Okay. So as you can see, like, there's even really short lines and stuff. Really, 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 really easy to read this. It took me really a couple of days, and I narrated this book, which I should have said at the top of the video. I actually, audio recorded myself while reading this book, and that's what took me 2 days. Otherwise, I probably would have read this in a day quite easily. So the writing style is very easy to read. However, I'm now going to talk a little bit about the plot and a couple of concerns that I have about children, even newly high school children, but still children nonetheless, reading a book like this. First of all, I want to let you guys know that I am not in any way verbally bashing Morris Gleitzman. I've read a ton of his books. He is extremely popular here in Australia, and he's definitely an author that a lot of kids grow up reading. He's listed many times as the book to read for class and all this kind of stuff, but I read one of his books and then I loved it, and so I ended up reading like 10 or 20 of his books really quickly early on in life, and I love him as an author. The thing is, all of his books, to me, they're all humorous books. They're funny. There's a lot of laughter that you'll find yourself laughing a lot when you read a Morris Gleitzman book. Until Once. This is not a funny book, not at all. And so if you pick this book up thinking, oh, it's a middle grade book, oh, it's a book by Morris Gleitzman, this must be a funny, humorous read. No, it's not. It's not funny at all from the get-go. It's not funny, and it's not funny at all the way through. So basically, this book has 150 pages plus an author's note at the back that explains things, but I'll quickly discuss the plot with you guys. So basically, we start off meeting this child who I've already forgotten his name. It's Felix. There we go. We end up meeting this guy, Felix, who's in an orphanage, and we end up finding out that he was dropped off at the orphanage because he is under the impression that, and there's a theme for you, he is under the impression that carries out throughout most of this book. There are a lot of times where things will happen that as an adult we know exactly what's going on. So if you're an adult reading this book, maybe your child needs to read it and you thought, I might just quickly read it first so I know what I'm getting myself into with my child reading this. As an adult, we know what's going on. Morris Gleitzman has written this book for both children and adults, kind of like with Disney movies and other kids movies where kids will see things one way, but as adults, we see it another way. We know what's going on in this book, but it's also written in a way that the child reading this may not know what's going on, and certainly the protagonist, who is a child himself, kind of explains things away in a way that only an innocent child can do. I gave an example, before I continue on with the plot, I just want you guys to be aware of this. I gave an example over on Goodreads where this is a non-book example, so this does not occur in the book, but this example shows what I'm referring to. Let's just say that there is a character, there is a child walking past the edge of a forest. So he's not in the forest, he's on the path, but he's at the edge of the forest, and he hears a guy screaming, and he's screaming because he is being stabbed, let's say. What you will get in this book is it will say, suddenly I heard a voice screaming out into the night. Yeah, great. Then it will say, but that's normal because every adult screams at this time of night because it's their way of saying hello to the moon. Yes, there are going to be some people out there who say, but Mr. Francy, that's just really cute. He's just a kid being a kid. But it hurt me. I didn't think I would get so emotional reading a middle grade book, but I really did. It hurt me to read this, that there are all these things that he experiences that he doesn't know what it is, and I am hearing his thoughts and hearing what he's saying while also knowing exactly what's going on, and that just, for me, that just really hurt me. Different people read things differently, different people are going to react differently, but for me, that just really hurt me. So anyway, let's just go back to the plot momentarily. So he's at this orphanage that's run by nuns, and he has been dropped off there, and again, he is under the assumption that he's been dropped off there because he has parents who are booksellers, hence why there are a ton of books on the cover. He has grown up as a child whose parents run a bookshop, and he loves books. He loves reading books and writing books, which is the one thing I relate to in this book. Anyway, he's under the impression that they are trying to get a visa to go to America, and once they have secured the visa, they're going to come back and get him, and they're going to go to America. So even though Felix is in this orphanage, he's under the impression that he's going to be leaving, any moment now. Like, he's just waiting for his parents to come back and get him. The reality is that this book is actually set during the Holocaust. And parents, if your children are being made to read this book, I say this to you now, be ready for questions regarding the Holocaust. Some of you, if you are a parent, some of you are going to be totally fine with that and totally ready to answer those questions, but those of you who are not, I need you to get ready for it, because questions will possibly be asked. It really depends on if the child really takes in what they're reading, or if they're just reading words on a page because they have to read it. But if you have a child that when they read a book, or if your child with this book ends up reading the book and they start thinking a lot about the book and what they've read, they will have questions for you. So be prepared to answer questions about the Holocaust. Look, just my advice, I don't know a ton about the Holocaust. I just know the general gist of it. But if it were me, and you do it your way, but this is just me. I don't have children, but if I had a child that was reading this and they came to me, I would be prepared for them to come to me and ask questions, because the book raises a ton of questions for children who are engrossed in the book. I would say, here's the generalization, and I would let them know what that is. And then I would say, if you want to know more, why don't we both go and do some research together? And I would go and research it with my child. Yeah, anyway, so we find out very quickly, and I found this out. I worked it out on page one because the book is set in Warsaw, Poland, and he's in an orphanage, and his parents are Jewish, and so I put it together really quickly, going, oh my god, this is about the Holocaust, and they're making kids read this. I had a very emotional response on page one to this being the book that they're giving first year level of high school students to read. But anyway, that's just me. So ultimately, these men. So I'll tell you in actuality, and then I'll tell you here's Felix's side. These soldiers, these Nazis, come along to the orphanage and they raid the library and they start burning Jewish books. Felix, the child, feels that he's doing this, or the soldiers, that these librarians, he thinks they're librarians, are burning these books because they just don't like books, or they don't like Jewish books, and so they have to burn them because they don't like these books. Well, obviously we know, anyone that knows anything about the Holocaust knows this is so much deeper than that. But again, so that was my first emotional reaction, going, oh my god, this poor kid, like, this is what he thinks is going on. And yes, I could have had the reaction of, oh, bless him, this is what he thinks is going on, so he's not going to feel the pain, but I almost felt it for him. Like, oh, his world is going to crash even more around him once he finds out what's actually happening here. But anyway, I'm going to try not to get emotional here in my review because I narrated this book, as I said, I verbally narrated this book, and there were moments where I had to physically swallow to stop myself from being so choked up as I was reading the book. But anyway, so he ends up leaving the orphanage because the mother, the Reverend Mother who looks after the kids, Mother Minka, she tells him that the soldiers are after the Jews, basically, and he worries about his parents, and so he runs away. They don't tell him to leave. He runs away himself to go and find his parents, and he goes to his home only to find out that his parents aren't there, and he again makes all these assumptions of wonderful places where they might be. Maybe they're on a holiday, and when they come back, they'll come back and find him, and other things as well. And so he goes for a walk, I think back to the orphanage or something, and he comes across these two dead bodies. Be ready for this, okay? Parents of whose children may not be exposed to a lot of death, which I wasn't at that age. Some children are, but I wasn't at that age. Be ready. They are going to experience that in this book. It's not extremely adult horrific, not at all, because it's a middle grade book, but Felix describes what he sees. He describes that there are bullet holes in them and that they are definitely dead. He tries to do a test with a feather to see if they're dead, and determines that they are dead. So be ready for that. Your children are going to read about descriptions of dead people, like physical dead bodies. So he ends up then coming across a girl who is with these adults that are dead, and the girl is alive. And so he ends up walking with her to find his parents in the hopes that when he tracks down his parents can help the little girl. Along the way, they end up getting captured, and I don't remember how or why, but they end up getting captured by the Nazis. They end up being taken to a camp where the children, there are 4 other children, I think 4 or 5 other children that are looked after by this really compassionate dentist, which I can't believe I'm saying those words in the same sentence, compassionate dentist, but anyway, really compassionate dentist who has a lot of love and care for these children, and Felix starts learning, the more you go along and the more you progress through this book, he starts learning what is actually going on. Why the Nazis are there, they don't like Jews, that they're killing Jews, all these types of things. The book, maybe this is just a middle grade writing style, but the way that it's written, it's very blunt. There is no flowery language, so when he finds out that the Jews, that the, and I say Jews because that's the way it's written in the book. I would otherwise say Jewish people, but it's written as Jews in the book. When Felix finds out what the Nazi soldiers are doing, that they are killing the Jews, he finds out because he is told it in that exact way. He's not told in a really nice way. He is told quite bluntly that the Nazis don't like Jewish people and they are killing them. So it's very confronting, it's very blunt, the way that it is done. Now, here I am saying all these concerns I have. As an adult, this is a book I can easily breeze through, aside from the fact that I got emotional because I felt so bad for the poor kid who had no idea, and then when he had an idea, I still felt bad for him. But it's more children having to read this. My concern was earlier on, and you may have seen this in one of my reading vlogs, that I said my concern with pre-selecting books that children in high school or even primary school have to read is that if the children don't like what they read, they will be much less likely to continue on reading once they leave high school. And so my concern was they probably just won't like the book. In reality, my concern now more is that if you have a child in year 7, or well, we call it year 7 here in Australia, but in their first year of high school that's reading this, and they haven't been exposed to death and certain levels of violence, this could be a little bit scarring. As I said, it's not over the top. It's not like you see people being killed. You hear it happen though, yep. So you hear gunshots and then you will see dead people. Yes, absolutely you will. He will talk about how they look. He'll talk about the fact that they are bleeding and there's a lot of blood and all this kind of stuff. Ultimately, the girl that he's with, it looks like she is starting to die. I don't know if she's caught some illness or if it's because she's malnourished or whatever, but it seems that she's going to die if she doesn't get some kind of paracetamol, which eventually they do get to her. Now, ultimately what happens is that the children are taken by force by the Nazis and they are forced onto a train along with all of the other Jews that are at that camp. They are then bolted into the train and then they start traveling wherever the train is going. And it is then in that moment that I remember reading about specifically what, I'm just choking up a little bit here, specifically what they did to children and babies back then. And I really didn't want to read about that because aside from it, in my opinion, being totally barbaric, it's really hard to read about, especially with children and babies. But the good news is that this book, there's a convenient plot point that comes up in the book where we don't see that happen. So I'm really happy about that. I will say this, right at the end of the book, half of the kids end up escaping the train because they choose to. They choose to jump off the train. They find a way to get out of the train. They choose to jump off the running train, the speeding train, and risk being killed by soldiers that are sitting up above them on the carriages. And Felix is one of them. The other half of the kids don't want to jump. The dentist that is with them says, even if one child doesn't want to jump, I'm staying behind with the kids. And they jump, 4 of the kids jump, and only Felix and the girl that he is with, her name is Zelda, they survive, but the other 2 kids are shot and, they are killed. And then the book just kind of suddenly ends with Felix saying, I don't know where my life is going to go from here. I could be dead in a minute or a month or a year, but I now have a second chance. So that's, I guess that's good that we didn't get to see what happened with the kids on the train, because that would have been really hard for me to read, especially children in their first year of high school. I don't think they should have to go through that. That's just me personally. It's just me personally. I know that it happened. I know that in an appropriate forum, maybe this is something that needs to be discussed with children at some point. However, that's where it comes back to you, parents. If your children are reading this book, as I said, and if they're reading it and then thinking about this book and become consumed by this book, they will have questions about Nazis, German soldiers, the Holocaust. Adolf Hitler's name is written way too many times. I'm sorry. I would never write a book about the Holocaust because it's just not something I want to write about. I prefer to write about fantasy myself. But if I was writing a book about the Holocaust, I would never mention Adolf Hitler's name, especially in a children's book. But his name is written many times. So just be ready for those questions to come up. Now, let's talk about writing style. Very easy to read. I've already said that with you guys. It's extremely easy to read this book. I started off giving it 3 stars, but ultimately I ended up giving it 2 stars because of many reasons. One, I did not enjoy the book, but I don't think that warrants a 1-star review if I don't enjoy the book. There are many things to factor in, but I will deduct 1 star if I don't enjoy the book, and so there's that 1 star. Also, I just don't think this book is age appropriate, and that's just me. There might be children out there who are in their first year of high school and they've seen all these horrors and thrillers and they're exposed to so much violence that this will be a sneeze for them. This will be really easy for them to get through. But for the more innocent children who spend their days watching Disney movies, this is going to be a reality check and a half for them. And so I just didn't feel it was an appropriate middle grade book. Young adult, fantastic. The writing style would need to change. The writing style is definitely middle grade. So Morris Gleitzman would need to write more in a young adult style than a middle grade style. It's just I feel that this would be much more appropriate. The plot would be much more appropriate for young adults. For young adults. Anything else? So the reason why it's called Once, or at least one of the reasons why it's called Once, is because every single chapter in this book, and I kid you not, every single one starts with the word once. I'm dead serious. I'm going to give you an example. So the chapters aren't numbered, but there you can see the word once, and I'm going to go to another random chapter. Once. Every single chapter starts with the word once. I don't like that writing style. If I'm to, critique a writing style, I don't like the fact that Morris Gleitzman felt that he had to write the word once at the beginning of every chapter, because it takes you out of the book in that first sentence. So if he's trying to say, we were then put into the carriages on the train, he would start off the chapter by saying, once I was put into a carriage on a train. We were sitting in the train and da-da-da-da-da-da. It really interrupts the flow of the book as far as I'm concerned. So I did not like that, and I took off some points for that as well. But most of the reason why I'm giving it 2 stars is because I just don't think this is an appropriate book to force children to read. I know this is not Morris Gleitzman's fault. However, one thing I can pin on Morris Gleitzman, and I love the guy, all of his other books that I've read, oh my gosh, one day I'll reread them and I'll review them and tell you how much they are amazing and they're so hilarious and, oh my gosh, like, wonderful to read. What I don't like about what he's done here is that this is a middle grade book. If Morris Gleitzman I don't think Morris Gleitzman has written a young adult book. I don't know. I could be wrong, absolutely, but I've only ever read middle grade books that he's written. I feel that this book should have been written as a young adult book, and then I definitely would have given it a much higher rating, but I have to consider the goal of the book. And the goal of the book is to create a middle grade book, a middle grade novel exposing some of the Holocaust through the eyes of a young child. I just don't think it does that. It does expose the Holocaust, yes, but I feel that it exposes the Holocaust in more of a young adult way. Now, there are going to be people who watch this who say, oh, Mr. Francy, you're crazy. It's definitely a middle grade book because of this, and this. And there are going to be things that I'll agree with you on. Absolutely. The writing style is absolutely middle grade. It's a breeze to read. It is so easy. It's definitely a middle grade. The words itself and how you read the words themselves, yeah, absolutely. It's an easy book to read. It's just the content to me personally, and I may stand alone on this, and if I do, I'm totally fine with that. But the content in this book, I just don't think is appropriate for middle grade students. I think this should be a young adult book, because there are young adult books out there that are violent books, and then there are young adult books that have violence in them that aren't as violent as this, and that's where my problem arises. I'd much rather... I mean, I get that you need to expose the Nazis, but I'd much rather it be done in a very different way. I'm sorry, this is just me. And at the end of the day, look, bless Morris Gleitzman. He wrote a book. I mean, he's written many books, but he wrote a book. He had an intention. His intention was to write about the Nazis, was to write about the Holocaust, and also to write a book based on a doctor that he read about. This doctor was in the train carriage with a lot of children, and while he had the option to escape, he said no, that he was going to stay with the children. If they die, he will die with them. And Gleitzman looks up to this guy, who has now died, obviously, as a hero. And I agree, absolutely, this guy was a hero. And he had that goal to write, to have that as an influence in this book as well. And he achieved that. And that's why he's not getting 1 star. He achieved that in this book. This guy that they're working with, what's his name? Barney, because I have to think of Simpsons when I say it. Barney he's such a lovable character. He's so great with the children. And he does say it at the end when the kids who decide to jump off the train, no, I'm going to stay behind with them. Morris Gleitzman definitely... wrote an ode in a fictional work, wrote an ode to this doctor really, really well. And I appreciate that. And I'm sure the doctor would too if the doctor sees this, but could see it from wherever the doctor is. But so he's done that well. And that's why it's not a 1 star, it's a 2 star. But all in all, that's my thought. 2-star book. It's... As an adult reading this, for me, it was tough, and there are going to be other adults that will read this and say, I don't know why I was so concerned after watching Mr. Fancy's review, because for me, this is really easy, and I don't care if my child reads this, and that's fine. To each their own. But for me, as I said, I don't have children, but if I did, I would have concerns. And I would probably get them to read the book to me. So like every night we might read a chapter or 2. The chapters are incredibly short. It's middle grade. So the chapters don't go for 2 or 3 pages, and the writing is fairly big. So it doesn't take that long to read. And even if your child is a slow reader, if the chapter takes them an hour to read, it shouldn't. But if it does, that's totally fine. Then what's an hour a night to have them read in front of you? I would do that so that if they have questions in that moment, they will most likely ask me questions about the chapter, and then we can talk about it together. But anyway, that's my thoughts. So what did you think of this book? Have you read this book, Morris Gleitzman's Once? If you have, let me know in the comments below. After my review, how do you feel about children being forced to read this book? The fact of the matter is, if you don't read this book and you don't do the homework assigned with this book, there are consequences for students. There is no choice. We are very lucky, very, very lucky as adults that we get to choose books that we want to read. And if we don't enjoy that book, we get to DNF the book and put it down. If you don't know what DNF means, it means did not finish. We get to put it down, pick up something else. Children don't get that option if they're forced to read this book. So that's my thought. Anyway, thank you so much for watching my review. I didn't think it was going to go for half an hour, but I think with my concerns, the half an hour was warranted for it. But anyway, I'm letting you guys go with peace, blessings, and so much love. And I'll speak to you again very soon. Mwah. Bye guys. Bye.